Hi, everybody. Dan Illman, Ashley Mailloux, taking a look at a pretty good feature race at Woodbine on Saturday. Let's throw up the field for the Grade 3 Ontario Derby. We're going a mile and an eighth on the Tapeta surface. $150,000 is the purse. It's a pretty full field of 10, and we've got two winners of this year's Canadian Triple Crown in this race. And they still have questions to answer. Why? Because Touch and Ride won the Breeders on turf. Velocitor won the Prince of Wales on dirt. And now they're going to have to deal with the Tapeta.
They are, and we're going to see some other of our familiar faces and friends, Dan, that participated in various legs of the Canadian Triple Crown. But there's also the newcomers that I think they all have their own challenges, whether it's facing some of these horses that have some big performances in their most recent outings, or they're making surface changes as well. So I actually think it's a pretty competitive event. I think there's a lot of directions to go. And there's actually some, interesting horses too. I think when you look at Stanley House, he's been a horse that I think is disappointed a little bit, but they're going to make another equipment change on him. And they've given him a little bit of time here to regroup. They skipped the Breeders' Stakes. So there's a lot to like about several in here.
Curious to see how this pace plays out. Maybe our friends at Timeform US can help us. I do agree that the 6 Velocitor can make the lead. I don't think there's a ton of true pace in this race. And Velocitor has shown in the King's Plate, he has shown in the Prince of Wales that he can get outright close to the lead. And he showed in the Coronation Futurity last year over course and trip that he can outright wire them.
I agree. I think he should be quite forward. I know in those races he hasn't necessarily been on the lead, but in terms of the fractions that were set, you think he does have the ability to be forwardly placed once again and maybe on the lead early. And I think the other horse that I look at a little bit is the 10 solo album, just based on that last out performance and the fact that he draws the outside in here. I think, the trip that Sahin Savachi is going to have to kind of get into is probably one that's going to be more forward from the gate.
One of the horses with potentially the most upside in the field is the number 1, Super Blessing. He's very lightly raced, and he's only going to be making his 3rd start of the year. Here's his most recent effort. This is the Toronto Cup, going a 1-turn mile, and he's sort of in behind horses here, turning into the stretch. He's going to ease eventually to the outside, and he'll give a solid enough finish to run 3rd. A nice building block performance. His first start of the year came sprinting on the Tapeta at Presque Isle Downs. He seems to really like that surface. To me, the main question is distance, because from a tactical speed standpoint to speed figure standpoint, he fits.
He does, and they've tried different things. He's been in, his races. They've stretched him out, shortened him up here and there throughout. I thought this was, as you said, a good building block to see what's next, and he is going to stretch out in distance while getting back onto a synthetic surface. And I think the big thing to point out, last time out in his first run in general at Woodbine, we saw a big improvement in his numbers, and you wonder if that was just second off the layoff. You wonder if now third off the layoff, can he take another step forward?
The 2 is American Blaze, and American Blaze has done some very good work in Western Canada on the dirt. Here's his effort in the Canadian Derby at Century Mile, going a mile and a quarter last time out. And he's going to make up some ground in here. He was wide for most of the way. He is a true stayer, and he stays on to finish 2nd. To me, maybe on the synthetic, that's a bit of a question. And I think he's the kind of horse that needs a little bit of a trip and some pace luck from the back of the pack.
I agree. I think it's going to come down to the pace for him. And just pointing out this race at Century Mile, big thing to note, Canadian Derby, it's a mile and a quarter. So I guess it's maybe a true Derby in that sense when you think of the King's Plate and you think of, obviously, the Kentucky Derby. I thought it was a really good effort. And I think with it being a longer race like that, he did get himself into a good position early and was able to make that move in the stretch. My other question with him would be not just the pace setup. Is he going to get what he needs? It's getting back onto a synthetic surface. He does have a couple of tries, one in the barn at Ben Colebrook, and one of them was decent, but I'm not sure what he really faced in that race going forward. So it's interesting to see him now switch provinces and come to Ontario for this race.
Twin City ran just fine 3 starts back, getting up for 3rd at a pretty big price in the Plate trial, but he just didn't fire his best shot in the King's Plate. I'm willing to forgive the Prince of Wales. It was on dirt. It was on wet dirt at that. The question, I think, at this point is he good enough going 2 turns against the best of his generation? I'm not sure.
I'm not sure about that. I'm just not sure we've seen what he showed as a 2-year-old. He had a very good 2-year-old season. I understand that he didn't find the winner's circle a lot, but a lot of runner-up finishes, and a lot of that had to do with him either being forward or closing from off of it, depending on the distance of those races. And I just think what he's shown to me in 2023 hasn't been enough. He's going to get a new rider, Emma Jane, and we know what she's able to do with horses climbing aboard. A very smart rider who I'm sure has watched his replays and will try to work out a trip for him, but he's hard to endorse based on the last several.
Similarly to Twin City, Cool Kiss ran just fine in the plate trial. Maybe he underperformed just a bit in the King's Plate, a very, very tough race. And then he ran okay in the Prince of Wales on wet dirt. My main concern with him isn't if he's good enough, it's the pace situation because he's just a true one-run closer.
I agree. That's what's going to come down. We've seen that time and time again. And I will say, I thought in the plate trial, the fractions were sensible, and he was really the only horse making up serious ground. He was well defeated, second behind Paramount Prince, but we know what he was able to do, especially in the next 2 legs of the Canadian Triple Crown. And I actually thought in the Prince of Wales, he ran really well, knowing that it was an off track. Paramount Prince went to the front and hung on for third. The other horses were tactical enough that they were close enough. I think the fourth place finish in that race is better than it appears. So I'm a little curious about him in this spot, but at 1.125 miles, he is going to need that pace help.
Stanley House might be lurking under the radar because I thought he ran just fine when third in the King's Plate. I don't think it was the best trip for him. He didn't break very well. He was in a little bit tight in between horses going into the first turn, 3-4 wide on the second turn. And all in all, he ran on quite well to be third. I'm not interested in all at the Prince of Wales again. I don't think that's his surface. Interesting that the blinkers are coming off here, but he's another horse. He needs some pace, but he has the class. And you could argue perhaps he's the best closer in this field.
I think so. And I think actually, I understand why the blinkers probably went on for the dirt race at Fort Erie, knowing that circuit very well and how speed plays. But I actually don't think he liked the blinkers, maybe the surface as well. He was just a lot more forward than we had seen. And I think looking at the King's Plate performance, I was happy with it. So I like the equipment change. And I think he's getting back to what he knows in a surface that he's very comfortable over.
Velocitor, I think, ran a little bit better than it looked in the King's Plate because he was chasing that leader's solid pace all the way around. And then he got tired, maybe 1.25 miles, just a tiny bit too far for him on the synthetic. I think the track might have carried him here, going 1 3/16 on the slop. He got up close to the pace. He's very game to win. He got a respectable buyer, and he's obviously run well on the synthetic in the past. If Justin Stein can get this horse out to the front and back down the fractions, he is a very strong contender at 6-1 on the morning line.
Certainly is, because considering this is his fourth win that we're watching right now, when you start to look at his other wins, 2 of them were in gate to wire fashion where he was really forward from the gate. I know they were at different distances, one at a sprint distance, one at the 1.125 mile distance, though, and I think that's key. And looking at the Prince of Wales performance, he still had to slug it out in the stretch. Coca Kaipu was closing. Paramount Prince was gritty in defeat. I still think ran a very good race considering the fractions and the track that he had to face. So I think looking at Kevin Attard's 3-year-olds in general, he's one that's gotten a little better with his starts. And I agreed with what you had said about the King's Plate. He still raced quite well.
You liked Touch and Ride last time out. You were absolutely right in the Breeders' Stakes, and Kazushi Kimura just gave Touch and Ride a beautiful ride. He's just patient in behind horses. He knows he has a lot of time at 1.5 miles, and he's going to finally extricate himself from some traffic, get to the outside, and the filly up front's game, but she's also going to be drifting out, and Touch and Ride shows some moxie. He's undaunted by being bothered here. He's eventually going to right the ship, and he's going to go on to a very game performance.
Yeah, if you watch the head on of this, it looks like, the filly's going to stop drifting, and she is still drifting quite, several paths outward. And I think, they get a little lucky. No one's really making up ground on the inside, because I think that would have been a tough way to lose that race, Dan. But very impressed with that. That is something that they were pointing towards and going towards. And now they are going to cut him back and get him back onto the Tapeta. But I still think when you look at the plate performance, not as bad as it looks on paper. I don't think he got a great trip, but I think he still tried throughout. So I'm excited to see him get back on that surface. And I think, winning at 1.5 miles and then cutting back, some horses really appreciate that. And it's something that they're able to build off of.
He's so lightly raced, and again, he's a horse that has the upside, and I think he's pace adaptable. I think he can stay close if the fractions are on the slow side. Forever Dixie's one of 2 fillies in this race. She got a perfect trip winning the Ontario Damsel for Mark Casse. She just saved ground at the back, and Patrick Husbands waved his magic wand, and the next thing you know, the rail opened up, and Forever Dixie is on her way. Solo albums in the 3 paths, she'll hold second.
Yeah, she ends up beating her stablemate here quite nicely, and it seems like, in terms of the trip that she got, I actually liked the trip. She was able to sit just off of it and make a late run, and she ends up being the best in this field. But with that said, it was a compact field to say the least. Now she's going to stretch out back in distance, and she's run well at a mile and an eighth, but now she has to tackle male rivals. And you go down the page, she's done that only once. It was a fourth place finish in the grade 3 gray.
Two-way crossing, the number 9 ran just fine for the great Roger Attfield in the breeders. He was a giant price that day. He picked up some horses late to run third, but that's his running style. He needs help up front. He's now cutting back in distance. My concern is he's going to be outrun early, and then it's going to need some luck.
Yeah, and you go back to the mile and a half, a turf race, Roger Attfield, that seems like that is his forte. I think when he entered that horse, he knew the horse had a live shot. By far his best race in terms of numbers. And in hindsight, it's always 2020. Probably shouldn't have gone off at those odds, knowing how those connections do things. But I do think he has his work, cut in front of him in this spot. And I think he's going to really need to improve, even off a nice performance, just because looking at his races at a mile and a quarter, he showed nothing in the King's Plate. Obviously, I don't think he had a great trip by any means, and he was a huge price in there as well. But he hasn't found the winner's circle often. And as you've said, that comes down to pace.
I was so impressed with Solo Album's race 3 starts back in the Celine. She blew them away, and I think Mark was impressed too because he wanted to test her. He sent her down to Saratoga, and he was very unlucky because that race was run in a monsoon over a boggy turf course, and she, like many other horses that day, just didn't handle it. My concern is maybe that race affected her a little bit because she showed up in the Ontario Damsel, and she was up close to that moderate pace, and yes, Forever Dixie had a better trip, but I just think Forever Dixie ran better than Solo Album did that day.
I think so. I mean, yes, she had a better trip and she wasn't chasing, but this one didn't really have much to offer. Her stablemate was really able to cruise by her quite confidently and easily. And you just wonder, what's going to make the difference for her. She had two really nice back-to-back wins, but as you've mentioned, Saratoga didn't pan out. And at 4-1 on the morning line, that might, for me, be a little short on a filly like her.
You took the words right out of my mouth. Off that last race, it just seems a little bit short. I think the tactics have to be different. Maybe try to get her covered up and make one run. Let's take a look at our top picks for the Ontario Derby. You're sticking with Touch and Ride. Why not? He's a classic winner. You know he's going to fire his best shot.
And I think you wonder, looking at the stretch run of the Breeder Stakes, how easily does he win if he doesn't have a filly bumping him all the way up the track like he was, under that pressure in a different sort of sense. And I agree, and I like that you pointed out with the pace perspective. When you go to that race 3 back, he was pretty close to it. So if they aren't moving that quick early on, I think he has the tactics that he needs to sit the trip. So I love him, lightly raced, but he's shown a lot so far.
Major respect for that horse, but I wonder if Super Blessing can take that necessary step forward in his third start of the form cycle. We've seen Michael Trombetta have great success recently with Spun Glass up at Woodbine in these graded stakes races at prices, and maybe he can kind of work out a little bit of a trip breaking from the inside post while close to the pace. 7-5-6-1 for Ashley, 1-7-9-8 for me. It's the Ontario Derby, and it is a good one at Woodbine on Saturday. Good luck.